The marble courtyard of Valenhall Palace echoed with screams as the massive black wolf circled Princess Ilara, its eyes burning like molten gold. For 3 months, this creature had haunted the kingdom's borders, killing dozens and driving entire villages to flee. Now it had breached the palace walls, and every guard lay unconscious or worse around the blood-stained stones. Captain Marcus stepped forward slowly, his weathered hands empty of weapons. The other nobles gasped. Surely this was suicide. But something flickered in his steel-grey eyes, something ancient and knowing. As the beast's growl rumbled through the air, Marcus began to speak in a language that hadn't been heard in these lands for 1,000 years. The wolf's ears twitched, its massive head tilted, and then, impossibly, it sat. Princess Ilara stared in shock as the most feared creature in the realm whimpered like a lost puppy at her guard's feet. But Marcus wasn't just any guard, and this encounter would unravel secrets that could destroy the kingdom forever. The ancient words continued to flow from Marcus's lips, each syllable carrying a weight that seemed to press against the very air itself. The wolf, larger than any natural beast, with fangs like ivory daggers, lowered its massive head until its muzzle nearly touched the blood-stained marble. Its golden eyes, which moments before had blazed with feral hunger, now held an almost human intelligence as they fixed upon the captain. "Impossible," whispered Lord Aldrich from behind a marble pillar, his voice barely audible above the strange incantation. He had served as the king's advisor for 40 years and had never witnessed anything like this. Magic had been purged from Valenhall centuries ago, its practitioners executed or exiled during the Great Cleansing. Yet here stood a common guard speaking the forbidden tongue as if he had been born to it. Princess Ilara remained frozen in place, her silk gown torn and stained with dirt from where she had fallen during her desperate attempt to escape. The wolf had cornered her against the fountain, and she had been certain these would be her final moments. Now she watched in amazement as the creature that had terrorized her nightmares for months submitted to a man she had barely noticed among her father's guards. Marcus took another careful step forward, his voice never wavering in the ancient rhythm. The wolf's massive form trembled, not with rage but with what appeared to be recognition, or perhaps relief. As the captain knelt before the beast, bringing himself to eye level, the creature let out a low whine that echoed across the courtyard like a mournful song. "Easy, old friend," Marcus murmured, switching back to the common tongue. His weathered hand extended slowly toward the wolf's scarred snout. "You've been lost for so long, haven't you?" The transformation in the beast was startling. Its hackles lowered, its breathing slowed, and the supernatural aura of menace that had surrounded began to dissipate like morning mist. When Marcus's calloused fingers finally made contact with the dark fur between the creature's eyes, the wolf closed its massive lids and leaned into the touch with an almost desperate gratitude. From the shadows of the palace entrance, King Aldwin emerged with a contingent of fresh guards, their crossbows trained on the scene before them. The king's face was pale with shock and something else, fear perhaps or recognition. His eyes were fixed not on the legendary beast, but on the captain who had somehow tamed it. "Hold your fire," the king commanded quietly, though his voice carried clearly across the silent courtyard. "Do not move." Princess Ilara slowly pushed herself to her feet, never taking her eyes off the surreal tableau before her. Marcus, the quiet guard who had served in the palace for 5 years without distinction, had accomplished what armies could not. He had spoken words that should not exist, and wielded power that had been forbidden since before her birth. The questions multiplied in her mind like wildfire. As if sensing the weight of so many stares, Marcus finally looked up from the wolf. His steel-grey eyes met those of his king across the courtyard, and in that moment Princess Ilara saw something pass between them, an understanding heavy with unspoken history. The king's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, while Marcus's expression remained carefully neutral, though she caught a flicker of resignation in his weathered features. The wolf stirred under Marcus's hand, drawing everyone's attention back to the immediate danger. but instead of rising to attack, the creature began to shimmer with an otherworldly light. Its massive form started to contract and shift, the dark fur receding to reveal pale human skin beneath. Where the legendary monster had sat moments before, a young man now knelt naked and shivering on the cold marble, his eyes wide with confusion and terror. By the ancient gods, breathed Lord Aldrich, finally emerging from his hiding place. It's Prince Damon, the missing prince, the king's nephew who had vanished during a hunting expedition 3 months ago, exactly when the wolf attacks had begun. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training courtyard as Kyle adjusted his grip on the practice sword. Around him, the other royal guards moved through their drills with practiced precision, their blades singing through the crisp air. But Kyle's mind wandered, drawn again to the fragments that haunted his sleep, flashes of silver fur and golden eyes, the taste of copper in his mouth, and always that inexplicable sense of loss. "Guard Thorn!" Captain Aldrich's voice cut through his reverie like a blade. "Your form is sloppy. Whatever's clouding your thoughts, clear it. The princess's life may depend on your focus." Kyle straightened, forcing his attention back to the present. "My apologies, Captain." "Apologies won't stop the Shadowfang if it breaches the castle walls." Aldrich approached, his weathered face grave. "The beast struck again last night. A merchant caravan 3 leagues north. No survivors." A chill ran down Kyle's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "How many?" 12 souls. Aldrich's jaw tightened. "The tracks. They're getting bolder, closer to the capital. King Roderick is considering moving Princess Lyanna to the eastern fortress." The mention of the princess sent an unexpected pang through Kyle's chest. He'd been assigned to her personal guard for only 3 months, yet something about her felt achingly familiar. Her laugh reminded him of wind chimes, though he couldn't recall ever hearing wind chimes before coming to the castle. Her presence stirred something deep within him, like a half-remembered song. "The princess won't flee," Kyle said with certainty that surprised even him. Aldrich raised an eyebrow. "You seem quite sure of her mind for a guard who's known her such a short time." Before Kyle could respond, a commotion erupted from the castle's main entrance. Servants scattered as a lone rider thundered through the gates, his horse lathered with sweat and foam. The man nearly fell from his saddle, his clothes torn and bloodied. "The village of Millbrook," he gasped as guards rushed to support him. "The Shadowfang. It came in broad daylight." Captain Aldrich cursed under his breath. Daylight attacks are unheard of. The beast is growing desperate or confident. Kyle found himself moving toward the messenger before he realized it, drawn by a compulsion he didn't understand. As he drew closer, a scent hit him, wild and musky, tinged with fear and something else, something that made his vision blur momentarily, replaced by images of burning thatch and screaming voices. "You saw it?" Kyle asked the messenger, his voice rougher than intended. The man's eyes were wide with terror, bigger than any wolf has a right to be, silver as moonlight, with eyes like molten gold. It looked at me, and I swear it was thinking, planning. No mere beast has intelligence like that." A sharp pain lanced through Kyle's skull, and suddenly he was elsewhere, running through moonlit forests, the wind streaming through his hair. But no, not hair, something else. The ground flew beneath him with impossible speed, and he could smell every creature for miles, hear their heartbeats, sense their fear. "Thorn!" Captain Aldrich's hand on his shoulder yanked him back to reality. Kyle realized he was gripping his sword hilt so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "I'm fine," he said quickly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "You don't look fine. You look like you've seen a ghost." Aldrich studied him with sharp eyes, or smelled one. The comment was casual, but something in the captain's tone made Kyle look at him more carefully. Had he noticed Kyle's strange reaction to the messenger's scent? How much did the captain really know about his past, or lack thereof? "Captain," a young page interrupted, breathless from running, "His Majesty requests your immediate presence in the war room. And he wants Guard Thorn as well." Kyle's stomach dropped. Me? Why would the king— Because, Aldrich said grimly, you're Princess Lyanna's most trusted guard, and she's just declared her intention to personally lead a hunting party against the Shadowfang. The world seemed to tilt around Kyle. The thought of Princess Lyanna in danger sent waves of protective fury through him, so intense they nearly buckled his knees. But beneath the protectiveness lurked something darker, a whisper of hunger that made his teeth ache. As they strode toward the castle, Kyle caught his reflection in a polished shield hanging from a pillar. For just a moment, his eyes seemed to flash golden in the morning light, and his canine teeth appeared sharper than they should be. He looked away quickly, but not before noticing Captain Aldrich watching his reflection with knowing eyes. The hunt for the Shadowfang was about to begin, but Kyle couldn't shake the growing certainty that the real prey might be something else entirely. The morning mist clung to the castle walls like ghostly fingers as Kyle made his rounds through the eastern courtyard. 3 days had passed since the attack on the village, and the princess had grown increasingly restless despite the additional security measures. She'd already attempted twice to venture beyond the castle grounds, claiming she needed to see the damage for herself, to comfort her people. Each time, Kyle had intercepted her with quiet efficiency, earning himself glares that could have melted steel. He paused near the rose garden, his enhanced hearing catching the soft sound of footsteps on stone. Without turning, he spoke into the dawn air. "Your Highness, the morning dew makes the garden paths treacherous." Princess Lyanna emerged from behind a marble pillar, her riding cloak already fastened and her dark hair braided for travel. "And yet I seem to be managing quite well, Sir Kale. The gardens, perhaps, but I suspect your destination lies somewhat farther afield." He finally turned to face her, noting the determined set of her jaw and the way her hand rested on the pommel of her ceremonial dagger. She had no intention of backing down this time. "My people are suffering while I sit in comfort, playing at being protected. That creature killed 12 villagers, Kyle. 12 souls who looked to the crown for safety." Her voice carried a tremor of barely contained emotion. "I won't hide behind these walls like a coward." Something twisted in Kyle's chest at her words, an unfamiliar ache that had nothing to do with his mysterious past and everything to do with the fierce compassion blazing in her green eyes. He'd known nobles who wouldn't spare a thought for a dozen dead peasants, yet here she stood, ready to risk her life for people she'd never met. "Your courage honors them," he said carefully, "but your death would serve no one." "And what would you know of death, Sir Kyle?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but she pressed on. "You appeared at court 6 months ago with nothing but a letter of recommendation from a monastery that burned to the ground. No family, no friends, no past that anyone can verify. Sometimes I wonder if you've ever truly lived at all." The words hit closer to home than she could possibly know. Kale felt the familiar stirring at the edges of his consciousness, fragments of memories that danced just beyond reach, accompanied by sensations he couldn't quite name. The scent of pine forests and wood smoke, the feel of earth beneath bare feet, the taste of iron and something else, something he couldn't allow himself to remember. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "that's precisely why I understand the value of the life I'm sworn to protect." Before Lyanna could respond, a horn sounded from the watchtower, 3 long blasts that sent ice through Kyle's veins. Emergency. Attack. All guards to their stations. They reached the main hall as Captain Morrison burst through the great doors, his usually pristine uniform torn and bloody. "Your Majesty," he gasped, dropping to one knee before the king who had appeared at the top of the grand staircase. "The beast. It struck again. Closer this time." "How close?" King Edmund's voice carried the authority of 3 decades on the throne, but Kyle caught the tremor of fear underneath. "Millbrook, sire. Less than 5 miles from the castle walls." Morrison struggled to his feet, accepting a cup of water from a servant. But this time was different. It didn't just kill, it seemed to be hunting something specific, or someone. Lyanna stepped forward, her earlier defiance replaced by royal composure. Survivors? A handful, but they all tell the same story. The wolf beast moved through the village like it knew exactly where it was going. It destroyed the blacksmith shop completely, tore through the inn, but left the granary and the chapel untouched. Almost like it was looking for something, Kyle finished, his mind racing. The pattern was wrong. Mindless beasts didn't hunt with such precision. Morrison nodded grimly. The survivors said it howled before it left, not like any wolf they'd ever heard, more like a man screaming in agony. And he hesitated, glancing nervously at the princess. "Speak freely, Captain," the king commanded. "They said it spoke, Your Majesty, just before it disappeared into the forest. One word, clear as day." Morrison's eyes found Lyanna's face. "Princess." The hall fell into stunned silence. Kyle felt something cold settle in his stomach, a recognition he couldn't name but couldn't deny. The beast knew her name. It was hunting her specifically. "Double the guard," King Edmund ordered, his voice steady despite the pallor that had crept across his features. "No one enters or leaves the castle without my express permission." But Kyle barely heard the king's words. His attention was fixed on the princess, who had gone very still beside him. And somewhere in the depths of his fractured memory, something howled in response to her fear, something that felt disturbingly like recognition. The scream that pierced the dawn air sent ice through Kyle's veins. He dropped his practiced sword and sprinted toward the sound, his boots pounding against the cobblestones of the lower courtyard. Other guards emerged from doorways and alcoves, their faces etched with the same alarm that hammered in his chest. The cry had come from the eastern wing, the servants' quarters. Kyle rounded the corner first, his hand already on his blade's hilt. What he found made his blood freeze. A young kitchen maid stood pressed against the stone wall, her apron torn and stained with something dark. Her eyes were wide with terror, locked on the ground before her. The body lay crumpled near the well. Thomas, one of the stable boys, barely 16 summers old. His throat had been opened with surgical precision, but that wasn't what made Kyle's stomach lurch. Deep gouges ran along the boy's arms and chest, 4 parallel lines that could only have come from massive claws. The scent of wet earth and pine needles hung thick in the air, incongruous in the stone courtyard. "Sweet mercy," breathed Captain Aldrich as he arrived behind Kyle. "Not again." "Again?" Kyle turned sharply. "This has happened before?" The captain's weathered face went pale. 3 times in the past month. We kept it quiet, didn't want to cause panic. But this," he gestured helplessly at the scene, "this is different. The beast has never come so close to the castle before." More guards gathered, forming a protective circle around the body. Kyle knelt beside the fallen boy, studying the wounds with an intensity that surprised him. The claw marks were too deep, too clean, no ordinary wolf could have made them. But something else nagged at him, a familiarity he couldn't place. "Sir Kyle," a breathless page appeared at his elbow. "The princess requests your immediate presence in the war room." Kyle stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. The scent of pine grew stronger for a moment, then faded like morning mist. "Tell her I'll be there shortly." The war room buzzed with nervous energy when he arrived. Princess Lyanna stood at the center of a group of advisors, her usually pristine appearance showing signs of hasty dressing. Her golden hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore riding clothes rather than court finery. Despite the circumstances, Kyle found himself noting how the morning light caught the green flecks in her brown eyes. "The beast grows bolder," she said without preamble. 4 dead now, and each attack brings it closer to the castle proper." "Your Highness," interjected Lord Harren, the king's chief advisor, "perhaps it's time to consider relocating you to the summer palace until—" "I will not be driven from my home by some oversized wolf." Lyanna's voice carried the steel of her royal bloodline. "We find this creature and we end it." Kyle stepped forward. "The wounds are unusual, Your Highness. This isn't an ordinary predator. The precision of the kills suggests intelligence. Purpose. What are you saying?" Lord Harren's pinched face showed skepticism. That the beast is somehow calculating its attacks? I'm saying we shouldn't underestimate what we're facing. Even as he spoke the words, Kyle felt that strange stirring in his memory again. Images flickered at the edge of his consciousness, moonlight on fur, the taste of fear in the air, the satisfying warmth of... He shook his head sharply, dispelling the unbidden thoughts. Sir Kyle is right, Lyanna said, which is why I'm organizing a hunt, a proper one, with our best trackers and fighters. Your Highness, Captain Aldrich protested, surely you don't mean to participate personally? I mean exactly that. Her chin lifted with familiar stubbornness. This creature threatens my people. It's my responsibility to stop it. The room erupted in objections, but Kyle barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the princess, on the determined set of her shoulders and the fire in her eyes. Something deep in his chest tightened, a protective instinct so fierce it made his hands shake. When? He asked quietly, cutting through the debate. Lyanna met his gaze. Tonight. The moon is nearly full, and our scouts report the beast hunts by moonlight. I'll gather the men, Kyle said. Good. She moved closer, lowering her voice. I'm counting on you, Kale. There's something about this whole situation that feels wrong, like we're missing something important. Standing so near to her, Kyle caught her scent, lavender and steel, courage and vulnerability intertwined. The protective urge surged stronger, but beneath it lurked something darker, something that whispered of hunting and blood and the sweet satisfaction of the kill. I won't let anything happen to you, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being, even as he wondered why the promise felt like both salvation and damnation. The morning mist clung to the castle walls like ghostly fingers as Kyle made his way through the deserted corridors. Sleep had eluded him entirely after his encounter with Princess Lyra, her words echoing in his mind like a persistent warning bell. The fragments of his dreams, if they were dreams at all, felt more vivid than the stone beneath his feet. He found himself drawn to the castle's archives, a musty chamber buried deep in the eastern wing where few ventured. The elderly keeper, Brother Aldrich, looked up from his scrolls with surprise as Kyle entered. My lord, 'tis rather early for scholarly pursuits. I need to see the records from 20 years past, Kyle said, his voice steadier than he felt. Anything concerning attacks on the kingdom, wolf sightings, missing persons. Brother Aldrich's weathered face creased with concern, a rather specific request. Might I ask, please? The word came out sharper than intended. The monk nodded slowly and shuffled toward a collection of leather-bound volumes. As he searched, Kyle's fingers unconsciously traced the scar along his forearm, a mark whose origin remained maddeningly elusive, like trying to grasp smoke. Here, Aldrich murmured, producing a tome thick with dust. The Chronicle of Sorrows, we called those years. Dark times indeed. Kyle accepted the heavy book, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. The pages whispered secrets as he turned them, revealing accounts of livestock found torn apart, travelers vanishing on moonless nights, and always, the mention of yellow eyes gleaming from the darkness. But it was a particular entry, dated precisely 20 years ago, that made his blood freeze. The beast struck the village of Millhaven with unprecedented savagery. Among the dead, Thomas the blacksmith, Martha his wife, their daughter Elara. Their son, aged 7, remains missing. Searchers found only torn clothing and blood near the river. The child is presumed devoured. May the gods grant him peace. The book slipped from Kyle's numb fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo through his skull. Millhaven. He knew that name, though he couldn't say why. The certainty sat in his chest like a cold stone. My lord, Brother Aldrich's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you quite well? Kyle barely heard him. Images flashed through his mind, a woman's gentle hands, a man's kind smile, the acrid smell of forge fire mixed with something else, something metallic and wrong, a child's scream that might have been his own. "The boy," Kyle whispered, his throat dry as parchment. "Was he ever found?" "Ah." The monk's expression grew troubled. "There are conflicting accounts. Some say a child was discovered weeks later by traveling merchants, badly injured and unable to speak, brought to an abbey in the northern reaches, if memory serves. But his identity was never confirmed." The room spun slightly as Kyle gripped the edge of the reading table. "What abbey?" "The Sanctuary of Silent Mercies, though it was abandoned years ago after—" Aldrich paused, studying Kyle's pale face with growing alarm. "After the monks reported strange incidents, unnatural sounds in the night. Some claimed the boy they'd taken in was changed somehow. A howl pierced the morning air, distant but unmistakably real." Both men froze as the sound reverberated off the castle walls, long and mournful and hungry. It was followed by shouts from the courtyard and the rapid clatter of armed men running. Kyle was moving before conscious thought took hold, his body responding to some deeper instinct. He burst from the archives and took the stairs 3 at a time, Brother Aldrich's concerned calls fading behind him. The main courtyard buzzed with activity. Guards clustered around Captain Thorne, who stood examining something on the ground with grim fascination. As Kyle approached, he could see what held their attention. Paw prints pressed deep into the earth, each one nearly the size of a dinner plate. "Fresh," Thorne announced grimly. "Made within the hour, I'd wager. The beast was here, inside our walls." A chill ran down Kyle's spine as he studied the tracks. They formed a clear path from the outer wall to the base of the princess's tower, then circled back toward the main gate, as if the creature had been scouting, learning. "Double the guard," Thorne commanded. "I want patrols on every wall, every entrance. And someone wake Lord Commander Garrett. He'll want to see this." As the guards dispersed, Kyle knelt beside the largest print. The earth was still soft from the morning dew, the impression perfect in its detail. He reached out to touch it, then stopped as a memory, or perhaps a nightmare, flashed through his consciousness. Running through darkness on 4 legs instead of 2, the taste of copper on his tongue, yellow eyes reflecting moonlight. His hand jerked back as if burned. Above them, the princess's window caught the pale morning light, and Kyle felt with terrible certainty that whatever was coming, they were running out of time to understand it. The wolf was hunting, and somehow, impossibly, Kyle knew exactly what it wanted. The princess's scream echoed through the stone corridors as Kyle burst into her chambers, sword already drawn. What he found made his blood freeze in ways that had nothing to do with the winter wind howling through the shattered window. Princess Liara stood pressed against the far wall, her silk nightgown torn and bloodied, but she was alive. Between them and the gaping hole where the window once stood lay the mangled remains of 2 royal guards. Their bodies were twisted at impossible angles, throats opened by claws that had carved through chainmail, as if it were parchment. "It was here," she whispered, her violet eyes wide with terror. "The beast. It spoke my name." Kyle's grip tightened on his sword hilt. The metallic scent of blood mixed with something else, something wild and primal that made the hair on his arms stand on end. He approached the window carefully, his boots crunching on broken glass and ice. "How did you escape?" he asked, scanning the courtyard below. Fresh snow had already begun covering the massive paw prints that led away from the castle. "It just left, as if it changed its mind." Liara's voice trembled, but before it went, it looked at me and said, "Soon, little princess. When the moon turns dark, you'll understand everything." A chill that had nothing to do with the cold settled in Kyle's chest. Those words stirred something deep in his memory, fragments of dreams that felt more like half-remembered truths. Images of silver fur and amber eyes, of running through moonlit forests with impossible speed. "Captain Aldrich!" Kyle called to the approaching footsteps in the corridor. "Double the guard rotation. No one enters or leaves the princess's wing without my permission." The graying captain appeared in the doorway with a contingent of guards. his weathered face grim as he surveyed the carnage. "By the gods," he breathed. Marcus and Willem were good men. How did that thing get past the entire night watch? Kyle examined the window frame more closely. The stone itself bore deep gouges, as if massive claws had found purchase in solid rock. But something else caught his attention, a tuft of silver-black fur caught on a jagged edge of glass. Without thinking, he reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the coarse hair, the world exploded into sensation. Images flooded his mind like a breaking dam, running on four legs through dense forest. The taste of raw meat and blood, the intoxicating scent of fear. And through it all, a woman's voice calling a name he almost recognized. "Guard, are you all right?" Captain Aldrich's concerned voice snapped him back to reality. Kyle realized he was gripping the window frame so hard his knuckles had gone white. The fur was gone. Had he imagined it? "I'm fine. Just the cold." But he wasn't fine. The visions had felt as real as the stone beneath his hands, and worse, they had felt familiar, like memories trying to surface from some locked corner of his mind. "Princess, we need to move you to the inner keep," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "The tower room has no windows and only one entrance." The words hit him like a physical blow. He turned to study his reflection in a shard of broken glass, seeing his own amber eyes staring back. Eyes that were indeed unusual for a human, though he'd never thought much of it before. "Many people have amber eyes, Your Highness," he said quietly. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. As they made their way through the castle corridors, past tapestries depicting ancient battles and long-dead kings, Kyle found himself studying every shadow. The attack patterns, the beast's intelligence, the way it had spoken. None of it matched the mindless monster from the stories. They reached the inner keep without incident, and Kyle personally inspected the tower room before allowing Liara to enter. The space was smaller than her usual chambers, but defensible, with thick stone walls and a heavy oak door that could be barred from within. "I'll post guards outside," he assured her. "Nothing will reach you here. Will you stay as well?" The vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard. "I have other duties. Please." A hand touched his arm. "I know it sounds foolish, but I feel safer when you're near." Something in her touch sent warmth shooting through him, followed immediately by an inexplicable wave of guilt, as if he was betraying her somehow, though he couldn't fathom why. "Very well, Your Highness. I'll remain close." As night deepened around them, Kyle stood vigil by the narrow window, watching the snow fall, but his thoughts kept returning to those impossible visions, to amber eyes in the darkness, and to the growing certainty that the beast knew far more about him than he knew about himself. The moon hung like a wounded eye above the castle walls as Kyle made his way through the shadowed corridors. Sleep had abandoned him hours ago, driven away by fragments of memories that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. The wolf's golden eyes haunted his thoughts, and with each passing moment, the certainty grew stronger. He had seen those eyes before. His boots whispered against the stone as he descended toward the archives. If answers existed within these walls, they would be buried deep in the kingdom's records, hidden among dusty tomes that chronicled the darker chapters of their history. The guard stationed at the archive entrance nodded respectfully, recognizing Kyle's authority despite the unusual hour. Ancient texts lined the shelves like silent sentinels, their leather bindings cracked with age. Kyle pulled several volumes, focusing on those that dealt with the old magic. The time before the kingdom had turned its back on the mystical arts. By candlelight, he read of shapeshifters and blood curses, of bonds forged in moonlight that could never be truly broken. One passage made his blood run cold. The curse of the wolfkin binds two souls as one, split by magic but forever connected. Neither can exist in full while the other lives, yet neither can find peace in death alone. Wolfkin. The word resonated through him like a struck bell, reverberating in places within his mind that felt sealed away. His hands trembled as he turned the page, and there, illuminated in faded gold ink, was an image that stopped his heart. Two figures beneath a full moon, one human, one wolf, their eyes identical pools of molten gold. You won't find what you're looking for in dusty books. Kyle spun, his hand instinctively moving to his sword. Captain Aldrich stood in the doorway, his weathered face grave in the candlelight. The older man stepped into the archive, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "How long have you known?" Kyle's voice was barely a whisper. Aldrich moved closer, his eyes scanning the open tome. "Longer than you might think. The question is, how much do you remember?" "Fragments, images, nothing that makes sense." Kyle's frustration bled through his carefully maintained composure. "But that creature, when I look at it, I see—" "Yourself," Aldrich finished the thought, settling heavily into a chair across from him. "Because that's exactly what you're seeing, lad." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kyle stared at the captain, waiting for denial, for laughter, for anything that would make this nightmare retreat back into the realm of impossible things. 20 years ago, Aldrich continued, his voice weighted with old sorrow, there was a young man in service to the crown. Brave, loyal, gifted with an unusual connection to the wild places of the world. When the princess, the current queen's sister, was taken by raiders into the Thornwood, he volunteered for the rescue mission. Kyle's head began to pound, images flashing behind his eyes like lightning, a woman's scream, the taste of blood, the sensation of bones breaking and reforming. That's impossible. But even as Kyle spoke the denial, pieces were falling into place, his lack of memories before joining the guard, his uncanny ability to track the beast, the way the wolf's presence called to something deep within his soul. "The curse split you into two beings," Aldrich explained. "The wolf carries all your primal instincts, your rage, your hunger for vengeance against those who would harm the innocent. But it also holds your pain, your guilt, everything you couldn't bear to remember. You, the man, retained the nobility, the duty, the love for the kingdom that drove you into those woods." Kyle's world tilted on its axis. "The princess I saved died 3 years later from injuries sustained in captivity. But not before she made me promise to watch over both parts of what you'd become, to ensure that neither half destroyed the other unless there was no other choice." The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the ancient texts. Kyle felt hollow, as if everything he believed himself to be had been carved away, leaving only questions and a terrible growing certainty. "Why tell me this now?" Aldrich's expression darkened. "Because the attacks aren't random. Something is driving the wolf toward the castle, toward Princess Elena. And I fear that whatever force wants her dead is using your own divided nature as a weapon." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "The real enemy isn't the beast, lad. It's whoever knows enough about your curse to manipulate it." Outside, a howl echoed across the night sky, long and mournful, filled with a pain that Kyle now understood reached far deeper than he'd ever imagined. The morning mist clung to the castle grounds like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their hold on the ancient stones. Kyle stood at the eastern ramparts, watching the sun struggle through the grey veil that had settled over the kingdom 3 days ago, the same morning Princess Lyra had fallen into her cursed sleep. "Still no change," Captain Aldrich said, approaching with heavy footsteps. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually pristine uniform bore the wrinkles of a man who hadn't slept. "The court physicians are baffled. She breathes, her heart beats, but she won't wake." Kyle's grip tightened on the stone parapet. Since the wolf beast's attack, fragments of memories had been surfacing like debris from a shipwreck, images that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. A woman with silver hair singing lullabies, the taste of wild berries and mountain air, and always the sound of howling that seemed to call to something deep within his bones. "The beast left no wounds," Kyle said carefully. "Yet she fell the moment it touched her." "Cursed magic," Aldrich spat. "The creature's more than just an animal. The scholars have been poring over the old texts, searching for answers. He paused, studying Kyle's profile. You've been different since that night. Distant. Before Kyle could respond, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. A rider in mud-splattered leathers had arrived, barely clinging to his lathered horse. Even from this distance, Kyle could see the man's terror. They rushed down to meet him. The messenger, one of the border scouts, fell to his knees before Captain Aldrich, gasping for breath. The northern villages, he wheezed, Ravenshollow, Millhaven, Thornwick, all of them. Gone. Gone? Aldrich demanded. What do you mean, gone? Empty, sir. Not destroyed, not burned, just empty. Food still on tables, doors left open, but not a soul to be found. And the silence. The man shuddered. It's unnatural. Even the birds have fled. Kyle felt something cold settle in his stomach. Any signs of the wolf beast? The scout's eyes widened. No, sir, but there were tracks. Hundreds of them. Human footprints, all leading north toward the Wraithwood, like the entire population's just got up and started walking. The Wraithwood. Even hearing the name sent an inexplicable chill through Kyle. In his fragmented memories, that place held significance he couldn't quite grasp. Dark trees that whispered secrets and shadows that moved independent of light. Assemble a patrol, Aldrich ordered. 20 men, supplies for a week. We leave within the hour. I'll lead it, Kyle said quickly. Aldrich frowned. Your duty is here, protecting the princess. My duty is to the kingdom, and whatever's happening in those villages is connected to what happened to Princess Lyra. The certainty in his own voice surprised him. How did he know that? But somehow he did. The wolf beast was just the beginning. As they prepared to depart, Kyle made a detour to the castle's ancient library. Sister Meredith, the elderly keeper of records, looked up from an illuminated manuscript as he entered. Guardsman, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I wondered when you might come seeking answers. You know something. She closed the tome before her, a bestiary filled with creatures of legend. I know many things. The question is whether you're ready to hear them. Her pale eyes studied him intently. Tell me, in your dreams, do you run on 4 legs or 2? The question hit him like a physical blow. He had dreamed of running, night after night, of forest floors beneath his feet and the wild joy of the hunt. But feet or paws, the distinction blurred in memory. The wolf beast, he said slowly, is not acting like a mindless creature, is it? Sister Meredith agreed. It's gathering, calling, and those who hear its song. She opened another book, revealing an illustration of people walking in single file, their eyes blank, following a massive wolf into darkness. They follow. To where? The old stories speak of a convergence. When the barriers between worlds grow thin, the ancient pacts can be renewed or broken forever. She looked up at him meaningfully. The wolf beast serves something older than this kingdom, older than memory itself. And somehow, young guardsman, I think you know exactly what that is. Kyle's hand moved unconsciously to his neck, where beneath his collar lay a small scar he'd always assumed came from childhood mischief. But now, touching it, he remembered pain and silver light and a woman's voice speaking words in a language that predated human speech. I have to go, he said abruptly. Yes, Sister Meredith replied. I believe you do. But remember, some truths, once learned, cannot be unknown. As Kyle hurried toward the stables where his patrol waited, the mist seemed to part before him like a curtain being drawn aside, revealing a path he somehow knew he'd walked before. The ancient stone steps descended into darkness so complete that even the torches seemed to struggle against it. Kyle's boots echoed hollowly as he followed Princess Lyanna deeper into the forgotten passages beneath the castle. The air grew thick with the scent of moss and something else, something wild and primal that made his skin crawl with recognition. The chronicles spoke of chambers sealed since the founding of Valenhall, Lyanna whispered, her voice barely audible above the dripping water somewhere in the shadows. My father forbade anyone from entering these depths. Kyle's hand instinctively moved to his sword hilt. The silver pendant at his throat had grown ice-cold, and fragments of memory continued to assault him. Flashes of this same darkness, the taste of fear and fury mingled on his tongue. Perhaps there was wisdom in that prohibition, Your Highness. She paused at a massive iron door, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the torchlight. Ancient runes spiraled around the image of a great wolf, its jaws agape in an eternal howl. Kyle stepped closer, and the pendant burned against his skin like a brand. "I've seen this before," he breathed, though he couldn't say where or when. Lyanna's fingers traced the intricate patterns, the old tongue. It speaks of binding, of sacrifice, of... Her words died as the door shuddered and began to swing open of its own accord. Beyond lay a circular chamber carved from living rock. Moonlight filtered down through a narrow shaft high above, illuminating a scene that stole the breath from both their lungs. The walls were covered in murals depicting the history they had only guessed at, kings and wolves locked in an eternal dance of conflict and covenant. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal bearing an ornate silver collar, its surface inscribed with runes identical to those on Kyle's pendant. Around it, the stone floor was stained dark with what could only be blood, though how old, neither could say. "The Binding of Fenwick," Lyanna read from the inscription surrounding the pedestal. Here the first king made his pact with the wolf lords, trading his youngest son for the protection of his realm. Her voice faltered as she continued reading, but the bond was broken by treachery, and the wolf prince was condemned to walk as both man and beast, remembering neither fully until... A low growl echoed from the shadows beyond the chamber. Kyle spun, drawing his sword in one fluid motion, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The pendant at his throat was burning now, and with it came a flood of memories so intense he staggered. A young boy standing in this very chamber, a silver collar closing around his throat, a king's tears falling like rain as he spoke words of binding, the agony of transformation, of losing himself piece by piece, until only the beast remained. "Kyle?" Lyanna's voice seemed to come from a great distance. He looked down at his hands and saw them beginning to change, fingers elongating into claws, muscles rippling beneath skin that was growing coarse with emerging fur. The wolf beast's attacks on the kingdom hadn't been random acts of savagery. They had been a desperate creature seeking something, someone who could break the curse that bound him. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice already deepening into something inhuman. But Lyanna stepped forward instead, her eyes bright with understanding, and something that might have been compassion. "You're not the guard who came to serve my father 6 months ago. You're the wolf we've been hunting." The transformation accelerated, but with it came clarity. He remembered now, the curse that split his consciousness between man and beast, leaving each form unaware of the other's existence. The wolf had been drawn to the castle by the scent of the royal bloodline, the same blood that had bound him centuries ago, and the man had been drawn to serve, compelled by instincts he couldn't understand. "The attacks," he gasped as his body continued its awful metamorphosis. "I couldn't control them. The beast... I was trying to reach you, but not to harm you. The binding can only be broken by royal blood willingly given," she finished, lifting the silver collar from its pedestal. "I know. I've been studying the old texts since the first attack. My ancestor's crime can only be undone by his descendants' choice." The sound of pursuit echoed down the stone steps. Captain Morris and his guards had finally tracked them to this forbidden place. They would arrive to find their princess consorting with the very monster they had sworn to destroy. "If you do this," Kyle warned, fighting to maintain human speech as his jaw elongated, "there's no guarantee I'll return to what I was. The curse has had centuries to take root." Lyanna met his transformed gaze without flinching. "Then we'll face whatever comes together." The collar felt warm in her hands as she stepped closer to the creature that had once been a prince, ready to risk everything on the hope that some curses could be broken by courage rather than steel. The ancient chamber beneath the castle felt alive with whispered secrets as Kyle pressed his palm against the cold stone wall. The moment his skin made contact, ethereal blue light erupted from carved runes, racing along the walls like lightning through his veins. Princess Lyanna gasped behind him, her torch flickering in the sudden supernatural glow. "How did you know this was here?" she whispered. But Kyle couldn't answer. He didn't know, not consciously. His body had simply led him through the labyrinthine passages beneath the castle, following some invisible thread of memory that pulled him deeper into the earth. The chamber revealed itself in the mystical light, a circular room with walls covered in intricate carvings depicting scenes of transformation. Humans shifting into wolves, wolves becoming men, and at the center of it all, a figure that made Kyle's breath catch in his throat. The carved man bore his own face, crowned and regal, surrounded by both human courtiers and wolf-like beings. "The Lost King," Lyanna breathed, stepping closer to examine the murals. "But that's impossible. You're just a guard, you said so yourself." Kyle's hands trembled as fragmented memories crashed over him like waves against a crumbling dam. Flashes of a coronation, of signing peace treaties with the wolf clans, of a betrayal that tore his kingdom apart. And through it all, the face of his most trusted advisor, a face he now recognized as belonging to the current king, Lyanna's father. "I was never just a guard," he said quietly, his voice hollow with dawning realization. "I was King Cale Thornwick of the Northern Realm. Your father, he was my chancellor." The princess stepped back, her eyes wide with disbelief and growing understanding. "The Northern Realm fell 20 years ago. Everyone said the king died in the wolf wars, that the beasts overran the castle, and the beasts didn't overrun anything." Kyle's voice turned bitter as more memories flooded back. "Marcus orchestrated everything. He convinced my people that I was growing too close to the wolf clans, that my peace treaties were a sign of weakness. He turned my own army against me. But how are you alive? How are you here?" Kyle moved toward another section of the wall, where the carvings showed a ritual circle surrounded by robed figures. "The wolf clans saved me. When Marcus's soldiers stormed the castle, the clan shamans performed an ancient ritual. They stripped away my memories, changed my appearance, gave me a new identity. They said it was the only way to keep me safe until the time was right. The time for..." Before he could answer, a deep, resonant howl echoed through the chamber, seeming to come from the very stones themselves. The blue light flickered, and shadows danced across the walls like living things. Lyanna moved closer to Kyle, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at her belt. "He's coming," Kyle said, though he wasn't sure how he knew. "The great wolf. He's been trying to tell me something, hasn't he? All those attacks, they weren't random." The howl came again, closer now, and with it came the sound of claws on stone. But instead of fear, Kyle felt an odd sense of completion, as if a missing piece of himself was finally returning. When the massive wolf appeared in the chamber's entrance, its silver fur gleaming in the mystical light, Kyle didn't reach for his sword. The creature padded forward slowly, its intelligent golden eyes fixed on Kyle's face. It was even larger than he remembered from their previous encounters, standing nearly as tall as a horse. But now, with his memories restored, Kyle could see what he'd missed before. The wolf's bearing, its careful movements, the almost human intelligence in its gaze. "You're not just any wolf," he said softly. "You're the clan Alpha, the one who performed the ritual." The great wolf inclined its massive head, then did something that made Lyanna gasp in amazement. It spoke, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. "The time of hiding is over, young king. Your enemy moves against the realm, and the old alliances must be restored." "My father," Lyanna whispered, her face pale with understanding. "He's been planning something, hasn't he? The increased security, the new laws against magic, the hunt for the wolves." The Alpha's golden eyes fixed on her with what might have been approval. "The princess sees clearly. Marcus seeks to expand his dominion, to claim all the lands that once knew peace between human and wolf. But first, he must eliminate the one person who could unite the clans against him." Kyle felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a familiar cloak. 20 years of hiding, of living as someone else, had come to an end. The kingdom he'd lost was calling him back, and the wolves who had saved him were ready to fight at his side once more. "Then we stop him," he said simply. The ancient chamber beneath the castle felt alive with shadows that danced beyond the reach of Kyle's flickering torch. Princess Lyra stayed close behind him, her breathing shallow as they descended the crumbling stone steps. The wolf beast's howls echoed from somewhere above, growing more distant but no less terrifying. "The passages connect to the old crypt," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "My grandmother showed me these tunnels when I was a child, before the king forbade anyone from entering." Kyle paused at a junction where 3 corridors branched away into darkness. Something about this place stirred memories he couldn't quite grasp, fragments of another time, another life. The musty air carried scents that seemed familiar, ancient parchment, dried herbs, and something else, something that made his skin crawl. "Which way leads outside the castle walls?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. The knowledge came unbidden, as if these stones remembered his footsteps. "The left passage," Lyra said, but her eyes were fixed on his face. "Kyle, you've been here before, haven't you? The way you move, like you know exactly where you're going." He turned away without answering, leading them down the left corridor. The walls here were older, carved with symbols that predated the current dynasty. His torch illuminated murals depicting great battles between humans and creatures of shadow, wolves with eyes like burning coals, their massive forms towering over fallen warriors. "These paintings," Lyra breathed, moving closer to examine them. "They're not just decorative, are they? They're historical records." Kyle's jaw tightened. The murals told a story he was beginning to remember, piece by terrible piece. In the flickering light, one figure caught his attention, a man standing between the wolves and a group of cowering people, his hand raised as if commanding the beasts to stop. The man's face was painted in shadow, but his stance was achingly familiar. "The wolf attacks began 20 years ago," Lyra said slowly, studying the artwork. "But these paintings are much older. How is that possible unless—" A deep growl echoed through the tunnel behind them, cutting off her words. The beast had found the entrance to the underground passages. Kyle commanded, grabbing her hand and pulling her forward. They ran through the winding corridor as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Stone claws scraped against walls, and the creature's breathing filled the narrow space, like the bellows of some hellish forge. The passage opened into a vast circular chamber dominated by a raised stone platform. Ancient braziers burst into flame as they entered, as if responding to their presence. The sudden light revealed the chamber's true purpose. It was a ritual space, its floor inscribed with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the dancing shadows. The old summoning chamber, Lyra gasped. But this was supposed to be myth. Kyle knew better. Standing in the center of the circle, surrounded by symbols of power and binding, the memories crashed over him like a tide. He remembered this place, remembered the desperate words of an incantation spoken in a voice that sounded like his own, remembered the taste of blood and the feeling of his humanity being torn away piece by piece. The wolf beast emerged from the tunnel, its massive form filling the entrance. But instead of attacking, it stopped, golden eyes fixed on Kyle with an intelligence that was distinctly human. Recognition passed between them like a current of electricity. "No," Lyra whispered, backing away as understanding dawned. "It can't be." The transformation began slowly, the creature's form shimmering like heat rising from summer stones. Massive limbs shortened and reshaped, dark fur receded to reveal pale skin. The wolf's features melted and reformed until a man stood before them, tall, weathered, with familiar golden eyes and graying hair. "Hello, brother," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of pain. Kyle's hand moved instinctively to his sword, but the gesture felt hollow. "Marcus." 20 years, Marcus continued, his naked form scarred and marked by the curse they both carried. 20 years since you bound me to this shape and fled the kingdom. Did you think I wouldn't find you eventually?" Lyra looked between them, horror and understanding warring in her expression. The Royal Guard who disappeared during the first attacks, Marcus Thorne. But that would make you... His younger brother, Kyle, finished quietly. The court mage who tried to stop the curse and became trapped by it instead. He met Lyra's eyes, seeing his worst fears reflected there. "I'm not Kyle Draven, Princess. I never was. That name belongs to a dead man whose identity I stole when I could no longer bear my own." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the chamber walls like breaking glass. "Tell her the rest, Aldrich. Tell her how you created the curse that's been terrorizing the kingdom. Tell her how every death, every moment of fear, traces back to your arrogance." The flames in the braziers flared higher, and Lyra pressed herself against the far wall, trapped between two monsters wearing human faces. The ancient chamber beneath the castle trembled as Marcus stepped through the crumbling archway, Princess Lyra close behind him. The air hung thick with the scent of decay and something else, something that made his skin crawl with recognition. Torchlight flickered against walls carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dancing shadows. "Marcus," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant howling that echoed through the stone corridors. "These markings, they're the same as the ones on your armor." He stopped abruptly, his hand instinctively moving to the scarred breastplate hidden beneath his cloak. The princess was right. The spiral patterns etched into the walls matched perfectly with the engravings he'd carried for as long as he could remember, markings he'd always assumed were merely decorative. "We shouldn't be here," he said, though even as the words left his lips, something deep within him urged him forward. This place felt familiar in a way that made his chest tighten with dread. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, dominated by a raised dais at its center. Upon it stood a massive stone throne, its surface stained dark with what could only be blood. But it wasn't the throne that made Marcus's breath catch. It was the figure chained to the wall behind it. The man hung suspended by iron shackles, his once regal robes now tattered and filthy. His head lifted as they approached, revealing a face that was haggard but unmistakably noble. When his eyes met Marcus's, recognition flashed between them like lightning. "Father?" Lyra gasped, rushing toward the dais. "Stay back!" The chained king's voice cracked with desperation. "It's a trap, Lyra. He's been waiting for you both." From the shadows beyond the throne, a figure emerged with deliberate slowness. Lord Aldrich, the king's most trusted advisor, stepped into the torchlight with a smile that never reached his eyes. But there was something different about him now, something that made the air itself seem to recoil. "Welcome home, Marcus," Aldrich said, his voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. "Or should I say, welcome back, my prince." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind, fragments of memory that had been locked away. A younger version of himself standing in this very chamber, the same throne but occupied by a figure in flowing robes, lessons in ancient magic, the taste of power on his tongue. "No," Marcus whispered, backing away. I'm not." "Oh, but you are," Aldrich continued, his form beginning to shimmer and change. "You are the heir to the Shadow Throne, trained in the old ways before your conscience became problematic. Did you truly think a simple memory spell could hide what you are forever?" The transformation was horrifying to witness. Aldrich's human facade melted away like wax, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath. His skin turned ash-gray, his eyes became pools of starlight, and when he smiled, rows of needle-sharp teeth gleamed in the torchlight. "You're the wolf," Lyra said, her voice hollow with realization. "All this time, the beast terrorizing the kingdom." "One of my many forms," the creature confirmed, "though I must admit it served its purpose beautifully. Nothing drives people to desperation quite like a monster in the night, and desperate people make such wonderfully poor decisions." Marcus felt the memories crashing back now like a dam bursting. He remembered this being, His teacher, his corrupter. He remembered the dark magic that had once flowed through his veins like poison, and he remembered why he tried to forget. "You made me into a monster," Marcus said, his hand finding the hilt of his sword. "I made you into what you were meant to be," the creature corrected. "A bridge between the old world and the new. But you ran from your destiny, fled into the arms of these cattle who call themselves nobles." Its gaze shifted to Lyra with predatory hunger. "Fortunately, the princess provides excellent motivation for your return to form." The king struggled against his chains, his voice raw with desperation. "Marcus, whatever you were, whatever he made you do, that's not who you are now. I've seen your heart. Lyra has seen it." The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Hearts can be changed, old man. Watch and see." It raised one clawed hand, and Marcus felt something stirring in the deepest parts of his soul. The darkness he'd fought so hard to bury began to claw its way back to the surface. His vision tinged red at the edges, and he could feel his canine teeth beginning to lengthen. "Fight it," Lyra urged, stepping toward him despite the obvious danger. "I know who you are, Marcus. You're the man who's protected me, who's shown me kindness when no one else would. Don't let him take that away." The battle raging inside him was tearing Marcus apart. Ancient power surged through his veins, promising strength and dominion. But against that tide of darkness stood one simple truth. He loved her, and love, he was beginning to understand, might be the only magic strong enough to break the chains of his past. The ancient chamber beneath the castle felt alive with malevolent energy as Kyle stepped across the threshold, his sword gleaming in the ethereal blue light that emanated from the walls themselves. Princess Lyanna followed close behind, her breath visible in the suddenly frigid air, while Sir Marcus brought up the rear, his face pale with a mixture of fear and determination. "The binding circle," Lyanna whispered, pointing to the intricate pattern carved into the stone floor at the chamber's center. Dark stains marred the ancient symbols, blood that had never truly dried, despite the centuries that had passed. According to the texts, this is where they performed the ritual that created the wolf beast. Kyle's memories crashed over him like a violent tide. He could see himself standing in this very spot, but not as he was now. The vision showed him chained to an altar, screaming as hooded figures chanted in a language that predated the kingdom itself. His human form had been torn away, replaced by something monstrous, something designed to kill without question or mercy. "You remember," a voice echoed from the shadows. Chancellor Aldrich emerged from a hidden passage, no longer bothering to maintain his facade of loyalty. His eyes glowed with the same unnatural light that pulsed through the chamber walls. "I wondered when the memories would return, my pet." Sir Marcus stepped protectively in front of Lyanna, his sword raised. "You're behind all of this. The attacks, the terror—" "The attacks were just the beginning," Aldrich laughed, his form beginning to shift and change. His human appearance melted away like wax, revealing something far older and more terrible beneath. Ancient scars covered his pale flesh, and his fingers ended in claws that looked capable of rending stone. "Do you think a simple beast could have evaded our armies for so long? Kyle has been my instrument for 20 years, killing my enemies while believing himself a hero." The revelation hit Kyle like a physical blow. Every mission he'd been sent on, every coincidental encounter with the wolf beast, every enemy of the crown who had mysteriously disappeared, it had all been orchestrated. He had been both the hunter and the monster, playing both sides of a game he never knew existed. "The princess was never the true target," Aldrich continued, circling them like a predator. "She was bait to draw you here, to this place where your transformation began. You see, the original binding is weakening. Your human consciousness has grown too strong, too independent. It's time for a renewal of the old magic." Lyanna's hand found the dagger at her belt. "What do you really want, Aldrich? Power? The throne?" "Power." The creature that had once been the Chancellor threw back its head and laughed. "Child, I am older than your bloodline. I was ancient when your ancestors were learning to forge iron. I created the wolf beast as a weapon, but now I need something more. The kingdom grows restless, and rebellions are stirring. I need a monster that can inspire absolute terror, one that will make the people beg for a strong ruler to protect them. Kyle felt the familiar burning sensation beginning in his chest, the precursor to his unwanted transformation. But this time, instead of fighting it, he tried to understand it. The magic that bound him was like a chain wrapped around his soul, but chains could be broken if you knew where to strike. "You made one mistake, Aldrich," Kyle said, his voice steady despite the pain coursing through his body. "You gave me a conscience. You let me form bonds, feel loyalty, experience love." His eyes found Lyanna's, and in them he saw not fear, but acceptance. "Those emotions you thought would make me easier to control, they've made me stronger than your magic." The transformation began, but this time Kyle didn't surrender to it. He held on to his human thoughts, his memories of protecting Lyanna, his duty to the true crown. The wolf beast that emerged was different, larger, more powerful, but with intelligence burning in its eyes instead of mindless rage. Aldrich's confidence wavered. Impossible. The binding cannot be. Kyle's lupine form struck like lightning, claws raking across Aldrich's chest and sending the ancient being stumbling backward. The creature that had terrorized the kingdom for months was now something else entirely, a guardian instead of a destroyer. But Aldrich was far from defeated. Dark energy crackled around his claws as he began to chant in the same ancient language that had originally created the curse. The very stones of the chamber responded, and Kyle felt the binding magic trying to reassert its control over his mind. "The ritual must be completed," Sir Marcus shouted over the rising magical storm. "If we can disrupt the binding circle itself—" Lyanna was already moving, her dagger raised toward the carved symbols on the floor. But Aldrich anticipated her action, sending a bolt of shadow energy that knocked her aside. The princess struck the wall hard and slumped to the ground, blood trickling from her temple. Rage consumed Kyle's transformed consciousness, but this time it was righteous anger, not the mindless fury Aldrich had programmed into him. The real battle was just beginning. The ancient chamber beneath the castle held secrets that predated the kingdom itself. Kyle's torch cast dancing shadows across walls carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. Princess Lyanna followed close behind, her breathing shallow as they descended deeper into the earth. "These markings," she whispered, tracing her fingers along the stone. "They're the same as the ones in my dreams." Kyle's blood ran cold. The dreams had been getting stronger, more vivid. Lyanna had confided that she saw wolves running through moonlit forests, felt an inexplicable pull toward the wilderness. He'd hoped it was merely the stress of recent events, but now, seeing her recognition of these primordial etchings, he knew the truth was far more sinister. "Tell me about the dreams," he said, though every instinct screamed at him to turn back. "I run with them," Lyanna said, her voice distant, "through the trees, hunting. I can taste the fear of our prey, feel the pack's heartbeat as one, and there's always a figure watching from the shadows, someone I should know but can't quite remember." The passage opened into a vast underground chamber. At its center stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with what Kyle desperately hoped was merely centuries of age. Above it, carved into the domed ceiling, was a massive relief depicting the transformation ritual, humans kneeling before wolf-headed figures, accepting some terrible gift. "The Covenant of Fangs," Kyle breathed, memories flooding back like a dam bursting. Lyanna spun toward him. "You know what this place is?" Before he could answer, footsteps echoed from the passage behind them. Chancellor Aldrich emerged from the shadows, but he was no longer the composed court official they knew. His eyes glowed with an amber light, and when he smiled, elongated canines caught the torchlight. "I wondered when you'd find this place," Aldrich said, his voice carrying an inhuman growl. "Though I confess I didn't expect you to bring her willingly, Fenris." Lyanna gasped and stepped back, but Kyle moved protectively in front of her. "Fenris is dead," he said firmly. "Is he?" Aldrich circled them slowly, predatorily. "The wolf beast that terrorizes our lands, the mysterious guard with no memory of his past, the princess who dreams of the hunt, such convenient coincidences." "What are you talking about?" Lyanna demanded, though her voice trembled. "Your guardian here was once the most feared of our kind," Aldrich explained. "Fenris the Wolf Lord, alpha of the ancient pack that ruled these lands before your ancestors drove us into hiding. But Fenris fell in love with a human princess, your grandmother, and betrayed us all." Kyle's hand moved instinctively to his sword, but fragments of memory were surfacing now, unbidden and unwelcome. A moonlit garden, a woman with Lyanna's eyes, the weight of choosing between two worlds. "The ritual was meant to bind their bloodlines," Aldrich continued, "to create a bridge between our peoples. Instead, Fenris destroyed the sacred grove and shattered the pack. We thought him dead these 20 years. I remember," Kyle whispered, the words torn from him. "I remember her face when I told her what I was. The horror, the betrayal." "Grandmother Elena," Lyanna breathed. "She died when I was 5. But she used to tell me stories about a guardian who protected her from monsters in the dark." Aldrich laughed, the sound echoing harshly off the stone walls. "Protected her? He was the monster, child. And now the bloodline calls to you as it called to her. The pack must be restored, and you will be our vessel." "Over my dead body," Kyle snarled, and Lyanna heard something wild creep into his voice. "That can be arranged," Aldrich replied, his form beginning to shift and elongate. "But first, witness what you truly are." The Chancellor's transformation was violent and swift. Bones cracked and reformed, flesh rippled and sprouted coarse fur, and within moments a massive wolf stood before them, larger than any natural beast. Kyle felt his own nature responding, the careful control he'd maintained for years beginning to slip. His vision sharpened. His senses exploded with new information, and he could smell Lyanna's fear, Aldrich's bloodlust, and something else, something changing in the princess herself. "Kale," Lyanna gasped, her hands beginning to tremble and shift. "Something's happening to me." He turned to see her nails lengthening into claws, her eyes reflecting the torchlight like mirrors. The royal bloodline carried the ancient pact whether she knew it or not, and being in this place surrounded by the pack's power was triggering her dormant nature. "Fight it," Kyle urged, though he could feel his own humanity slipping away. "You're stronger than this curse." But Aldrich was advancing, and Kyle knew that in moments they would all be lost to the beast within. The real enemy had never been the wolf terrorizing the kingdom, it had been the trap being laid to restore the ancient pack's dominance. The princess he'd sworn to protect was transforming before his eyes, and the man he'd believed himself to be was nothing more than a comfortable lie. The ancient chamber beneath the castle trembled as Marcus pressed his palm against the crystalline heart of the binding seal. Power coursed through him, raw, primal, and achingly familiar. The wolf within him howled in recognition, remembering what had been stolen, what had been twisted into something monstrous above. "You understand now," Lord Blackthorn said, his voice echoing off the carved stone walls. "The beast that terrorizes our kingdom, it was never meant to be a weapon of destruction. It was meant to be our protector." Princess Lyanna stood frozen beside the ornate altar, her face pale in the ethereal blue light emanating from the seal. "Marcus, what is he saying?" The memories flooded back like a dam breaking. Marcus saw himself centuries ago, not as a man, but as something between wolf and human, guardian of the royal bloodline. He remembered the ritual, the binding, the price paid to protect the kingdom from an ancient evil that stirred beyond the northern mountains. "I was the first," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with understanding. "The first guardian bound to your family's line. But something went wrong." Blackthorn stepped closer, his scholarly robes rustling. "Not wrong, sabotaged. My predecessor, the court mage of old, he grew jealous of the bond between guardian and crown. He corrupted the seal, split your essence in two. Part of you was bound to human form, stripped of memory and purpose. The other part, he gestured upward, toward the distant sounds of destruction echoing through the castle foundations. The other part became the beast, Marcus finished, horror dawning in his chest. All this time, I've been hunting myself. The chamber shuddered again as something massive struck the floors above. Dust rained down from ancient stones, and Lyanna stumbled, catching herself against the altar. The corruption grows stronger, Blackthorn continued urgently. Each night the beast manifests, it becomes more twisted, more lost to rage. Soon it will be beyond redemption entirely. But you still carry the key to restoration. Marcus pulled his hand back from the crystal, but the connection remained. He could feel it now, the other half of his soul, wild and tortured, driven to madness by the incomplete binding. It sought him as desperately as he had sought it, but neither had understood what they were truly searching for. How do I stop it? Marcus asked. How do I restore what was broken? By accepting what you truly are, Blackthorn replied. By embracing both halves, the man and the wolf, the guardian and the beast. But know this, the process may destroy the Marcus you believe yourself to be, the guard who has served faithfully, who has loved. His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Lyanna. No, Lyanna said sharply, stepping forward. There has to be another way. I won't lose him to some ancient magic. I won't let him sacrifice himself for you. Marcus turned to face her, and she saw the golden wolf light flickering in his eyes. Lyanna, this is what I was made for, what I've always been, even when I couldn't remember. Every instinct that drove me to protect you, every moment I felt like I belonged at your side, it was the binding calling to its purpose. The sounds of battle grew louder overhead. Steel clashed against claw, men shouted orders, and somewhere in the chaos was the bone-deep howl of the beast, his other half, crying out in anguish. The kingdom's army cannot hold it much longer, Blackthorn warned. Each moment you delay, more innocent blood is spilled. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the pull of two destinies. He could sense Captain Aldrich leading the castle guard in a desperate defense, could hear the screams of servants fleeing through corridors he had once patrolled in peaceful times, and beneath it all, the beast's pain called to him, a mirror of his own fractured soul. If I do this, he said slowly, if I reunite the halves, what happens to the man I've become? To my feelings, my memories of this life? Blackthorn's expression softened slightly. I cannot say. The magic is old, and much knowledge was lost when my predecessor fell to his own jealousy. You may retain everything, or you may become something entirely new. The risk is yours to take. Lyanna moved to his side, her hand finding his. Whatever you become, whoever you are beneath all of this, I know your heart. That much won't change. Another tremendous crash shook the chamber, and cracks appeared in the ancient stonework. Time was running out. Marcus looked at the crystal seal, then at Lyanna's determined face, and finally at Blackthorn's expectant gaze. Somewhere above, his other half raged against bonds it couldn't understand, driven by centuries of incomplete purpose. He placed both hands on the crystal heart. Then let's end this, he said. Let's bring the guardian home. The seal blazed with light, and Marcus felt himself begin to change. The silver chains binding Kyle's wrists burned like ice against his skin as Lord Commander Tame dragged him through the castle's lowest dungeons. Each step echoed in the stone corridors, a death knell that seemed to mock his failures. Princess Lyra walked behind them, her face a mask of betrayal and disgust that cut deeper than any blade. 20 years, Thane said, his voice carrying the weight of long-buried fury. 20 years I've waited for this moment, Fenris. The name hit Kyle like a physical blow. Memories crashed over him in waves, the taste of blood in his mouth, the screams of villagers, the feeling of his human consciousness drowning beneath bestial rage. He remembered now. He remembered everything. The Crimson Night, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. You're the wolf that killed my mother. Kyle's legs nearly gave out. The Queen. Beautiful, kind Queen Elena, who had tried to calm him with gentle words even as his claws raked across her throat. He could see her face now, peaceful even in death, trusting even as the monster wore her husband's features. The irony is exquisite, Thane continued, shoving Kyle into a circular chamber deep beneath the castle. Ancient runes covered every surface, glowing with a sickly green light that made Kyle's transformed blood burn. King Aldric's loyal guard, protecting the very princess whose mother he murdered. Did you enjoy the charade? I didn't know, Kyle gasped, falling to his knees as the runic magic pressed against his consciousness. I swear to you, I didn't remember. Lies. Thane's boot connected with Kyle's ribs, sending him sprawling across the stone floor. You think we're fools? You think we don't know what you are? Princess Lyra stepped forward, and Kyle flinched at the cold hatred in her eyes. This was worse than any torture Thane could devise. Tell me why, she demanded. Tell me why you killed her. Kyle struggled to find words that could somehow bridge the impossible gulf between them. It wasn't me, not the real me. The curse, it takes everything human and twists it into a convenient excuse, Thane finished. He moved to an ornate altar at the chamber's center where an obsidian dagger lay waiting. The blade seemed to drink in the green light, becoming a void in the shape of death. But your suffering ends tonight, beast, as does the kingdom's. Kyle's enhanced hearing caught something the others missed. Footsteps in the corridor above, moving with purpose. Too heavy for servants, too quiet for guards. His heart lurched with desperate hope and crushing dread. Aldric had come. The ritual blade of House Thane, the Lord Commander continued, lifting the dagger with reverent hands. Forged specifically to end your cursed bloodline. My ancestors failed to finish what they started, but I will not. Wait. Lyra's voice stopped Thane mid-stride. Before you kill him, I want to know about the other attacks. The wolf that's been hunting me. If Kyle was here the whole time, then who— The chamber door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. King Aldric stood silhouetted in the doorway, but something was wrong. His eyes held the same golden gleam that Kyle had seen in his own reflection, and when he smiled, his teeth were too sharp. The answer to that question, Aldric said, his voice carrying an inhuman growl, is standing right in front of you. Thane's face went white. No, impossible. You can't be— Can't be what, old friend? Aldric stepped into the chamber, and with each footstep, his form seemed to blur and shift. Can't be the beast you've been hunting? Can't be the wolf that's been terrorizing my own kingdom? Lyra stumbled backward, her hand flying to her throat. Father? I'm sorry, my dear. Aldric's transformation was beginning, bones cracking and reshaping beneath his skin. But some hungers are stronger than love. Some curses run deeper than blood. Kyle understood with horrible clarity. The bite that had turned him, it hadn't been random. Aldric had made him into a monster to have someone to blame, someone to bear the guilt while the king continued to feed. And when Kyle's memories had been suppressed by trauma and magic, he'd become the perfect scapegoat. You used me, Kyle whispered. I saved you, Aldric snarled, his voice becoming more bestial with each word. Gave you purpose, meaning. Without me, you're just another broken knight with blood on his hands. Thane raised the obsidian dagger, his hand shaking. All these years, you let me believe. You believed what you needed to believe. Aldric's transformation accelerated, golden fur sprouting across his expanding frame, just as my kingdom believes their beloved princess needs protection from the big bad wolf. The king's laugh echoed off the chamber walls as his humanity finally slipped away entirely. But tonight, I think it's time for Little Red Riding Hood to come home to grandmother's house. The wolf beast's massive form writhed against the silver chains that bound it to the altar, each link glowing with ancient runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. Princess Lyrale stood at the edge of the summoning circle, her face pale but determined, while Chancellor Morrigan raised the ceremonial blade high above his head. 15 years I've waited for this moment, Morrigan said, his voice echoing through the chamber carved deep beneath the castle. 15 years since I bound your memories and sent you to serve as my unwitting guardian. Kale felt the last fragments of his stolen past clicking into place like pieces of a shattered mirror. He wasn't just any royal guard, he was Prince Kyle Ravencrest, heir to the neighboring kingdom of Shadowmere. The wolf beast wasn't some random monster, it was his brother. Marcus, he whispered, staring at the creature that had once been Prince Marcus Ravencrest. Golden eyes, so familiar yet wild with forced rage, met his own. The binding grows weak, Morrigan continued, pressing the blade's edge against his palm until blood dripped onto the circle's perimeter. Your brother's transformation was meant to be permanent, a weapon I could control. But blood calls to blood, and your presence has been problematic. The wolf beast, Marcus, let out a low whine that sounded almost human. Kyle could see intelligence fighting against the curse, struggling to break free. You made him kill our parents, Kyle said, pieces of memory flooding back. The night of flames, the howling, the way his brother had looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes before the guards dragged Kyle away. You transformed him and used him as your weapon to claim both kingdoms. Clever boy. Morrigan's smile was sharp as winter frost, though it took you long enough to remember. The memory blocks I placed were quite thorough. You've spent years faithfully protecting the very princess whose kingdom I planned to claim. Princess Lirale stepped forward, her hand moving to the hidden dagger at her waist. My father trusted you. The whole kingdom trusted you. Your father was weak, Morrigan spat. He would have led this realm to ruin with his peaceful ideals. Sometimes strength must be taken, not inherited. The chains holding Marcus began to crack as his struggles intensified. Kyle could feel something stirring in his own blood, a warmth that had nothing to do with the chamber's oppressive heat. The bond between brothers, even one twisted by dark magic, was stronger than Morrigan had anticipated. The final ritual requires royal blood from both kingdoms, Morrigan said, raising the blade toward Lirale. Her death will complete the binding, making your brother's transformation irreversible while granting me dominion over both realms. Kyle lunged forward, but invisible forces slammed him back against the stone wall. Magical wards crackled around the summoning circle, keeping him trapped outside, while Morrigan advanced on the princess. Fight it, Marcus, Kyle shouted to his brother. I remember now. Remember the oath we swore as children. We protect each other. Always. The wolf beast's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Kyle saw his brother looking back at him. Marcus threw his head back and howled, but this time it wasn't rage or hunger, it was anguish. The sound reverberated through the chamber, and hairline cracks appeared in the glowing chains. Lirale dodged Morrigan's first strike, her own blade flashing in the runic light. She was skilled, but the Chancellor wielded magic as well as steel. Dark energy crackled from his free hand, forcing her back toward the altar, where Marcus strained against his bonds. You cannot stop this, Morrigan declared, weaving spells that made the very air thick and suffocating. I have planned too long, sacrificed too much. But Kyle felt the warmth in his blood growing stronger. The memory blocks Morrigan had placed were crumbling, and with them came power he'd forgotten he possessed. Shadowmere's royal line carried gifts passed down through generations, the ability to forge bonds with creatures of darkness, to understand and communicate with them. He pressed his palms against the magical barrier, pouring his newfound strength into breaking through. Marcus, remember who you are. Remember why we fight. The wolf beast's struggles reached a crescendo, and the silver chains finally snapped. But instead of attacking blindly as he had for 15 years, Marcus turned his golden gaze on Morrigan. Intelligence burned there now, and recognition, and fury. Morrigan's confident expression faltered as he realized his control was slipping. Impossible. The transformation cannot be reversed. You're wrong, Kyle said, as the barrier finally gave way and he stumbled into the circle. You never understood the bond between us. Magic can twist the body, but it cannot break blood. Marcus stalked toward Morrigan, No longer a mindless beast, but a prince reclaiming his stolen identity. The Chancellor raised his blade desperately, but 15 years of suppressed memories and rage would not be denied. The real battle was about to begin. The ancient stone chamber trembled as the wolf beast's true form dissolved into shadow and mist, revealing the broken figure of Lord Commander Aldrich beneath. His silver hair was matted with blood, his eyes hollow with years of torment. The curse that had bound him, that had twisted him into the very monster he'd once sworn to protect the kingdom from, finally released its hold. Kael, no longer the mysterious guard with fragmented memories, but Prince Kael of the Northern Realm, knelt beside his former mentor. The restoration of his true identity had brought with it a crushing weight of remembrance, the political marriage that would unite two kingdoms, his desperate flight on the eve of the wedding, and the magical accident that had stolen his memories and throne. "The princess," Aldrich gasped, his hand clutching Kael's arm with surprising strength. "She was never the target. It was always about you." Princess Lyanna stood in the chamber's entrance, her silver sword still gleaming with the enchantments that had helped break the curse. Behind her, the sounds of battle echoed through the corridors as the castle guard fought against Duke Theron's mercenaries, the real threat that had used the wolf beast legend as a distraction for their coup. "Theron knew who you were before you remembered yourself," Lyanna said, moving closer. "He's been planning this for months. The wolf attacks, the fear they generated, it was all to position himself as the kingdom's savior while eliminating both you and my father." Kael felt the weight of his recovered crown, not a physical thing, but the burden of two kingdoms' futures pressing down on him. "The Northern Realm thinks me dead. My absence created the power vacuum Theron needed, and my kingdom faces civil war," Lyanna added grimly. "Unless we stop him tonight." The irony wasn't lost on Kael. In seeking to forget his responsibilities through magic, he'd inadvertently enabled the very chaos he'd been trying to escape. His selfishness had cost lives, had turned a good man into a monster, had brought two kingdoms to the brink of war. "I won't run again," Kael said, helping Aldrich to his feet. "But I can't undo what I've done." "No," Lyanna agreed. "But you can choose what you do now." The chamber shook again as an explosion echoed from above. Theron's forces were making their final push for the throne room. Time was running out. "The northern armies," Kael said suddenly. "My cousin Marcus holds the regency. If I can get word to him—" "Already done," Lyanna interrupted, producing a crystal that pulsed with magical energy. "I sent the message an hour ago, but even if they ride hard, they're 2 days away. Then we hold until they arrive," Aldrich said, though his voice betrayed his exhaustion. Kael shook his head. "No. We end this tonight. Theron's strength comes from fear and legitimacy. Take away both, and his support crumbles." They moved through the castle's secret passages, avoiding the main battles. Kael's restored memories included detailed knowledge of the keep's hidden ways, knowledge that served him now as they approached the throne room from beneath. The great hall was filled with Theron's soldiers and cowed nobles. The Duke himself sat upon the throne, a crown of silver and sapphires gleaming on his brow. King Aldwyn knelt before him in chains, bloodied but alive. "And so the old kingdom dies," Theron proclaimed to his audience, "and a new era begins." That was when Kael stepped from behind the tapestries, no longer hiding, no longer running from who he was meant to be. The sight of him, the lost prince, returned at the kingdom's darkest hour, sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. "The only thing dying tonight," Kael declared, his voice carrying the authority of his bloodline, "is your treachery, Theron." Lyanna emerged from the opposite side of the hall, her sword ready. Aldrich, despite his weakness, took position by the main doors. The three of them formed a triangle around Theron's forces. "You're too late," Theron snarled, but Kael could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I am crowned. I am king. A crown stolen is no crown at all," Kael replied, "and a throne built on lies cannot stand." The battle that followed was brief but fierce. The nobles, seeing their true prince returned and their princess fighting beside him, found their courage. The castle guard, no longer confused about who they served, turned against the mercenaries. And when the dust settled, it was Theron who knelt in chains. As dawn broke over the kingdom, Kyle stood beside Lyanna on the castle walls, watching the sunrise paint the land in gold. Two kingdoms awaited their future. This time, he would not run from it.